Since the version 5 mixer has changed so much, we needed to have a really good way to configure our mixer. So we actually added a new feature called the Mixer Configurator. Under the Mixer pull down, we can go to Configure Mixer. Alright, the first thing you see here is kind of a dual window interface. Okay, the top is going to show the actual buses that we can create and add to our mixer, and the bottom is going to show the actual mix bus configuration. Let's start with the top and go over the different buttons here. Now we can go ahead and add new mix buses to the configuration. I can press the plus button to add, a bunch of different mix buses. I added 3 mix buses right now. Now you actually, once you have the name up, you can double click on any of the names and change them. So we'll call this one main, and by using the tab key, I can go to the next value, and we'll call this reverb, and the next one I might call drum sub. Now, if tab goes down, shift and tab goes back up. Once you're done, you can go ahead and click or press return, doesn't matter. Now you've renamed your buses. Next thing you can do is change the type. We select and support a bunch of different types now, from mono up to 7.1 surround, which is kind of cool. And we have a bus mode. There's 2 modes of buses inside of the Mio console. The first is a master bus, and the master bus has a master fader and can route to any output, whether it's FireWire or physical outputs. An aux bus has no master fader and cannot route to physical outputs. That's the main difference. We'll be talking about the functionality of when to use one bus or the other later, but just know that's the basic difference. Master bus has a master fader, aux bus does not. All right. Once you've actually created these buses here, you want to look at the bottom pane. We're going to come back to the actual being able to move the buses up and down later. Once you have selected one of the buses here, the bottom shows you the available input channels that you actually can add to your mix configuration. Okay, and there's a scroll wheel here to scroll down and show you all the different sources. Now it always lists the sources as follows. You get the mono sources first, listed next to the multi-channel sources. You see now we have stereo pairs, DAW 1718, because we're in a stereo mix bus type. If I change this to like a 7.1 and come back to that bus, now when I get to the multi-channel configurations, I'll actually see all of my different multi-channel sources. Let's put this thing back to stereo and come back to this bus to see that my configurations have come back to 2 channels. So DAW 1 and 2 together, ADAT 1 and 2 together, and analog 1 and 2. Now, any of the different input configurations. What I'm listing here is the boxes it belongs to, which is important because you actually can now configure a mixer across multiple boxes. So you want to know what the serial number is and the actual description of the box. If you do have multiple boxes shown, you can actually limit the number of channels by clicking on the Show Input Channels From and selecting a single box to start configuring from. That only is going to work if you have multiple boxes. If you're working with offline boxes, you can also choose to hide the offline box with this check mark. All right, once you're actually in this configurator, you can simply select the channels you'd like to select. So if I want to have this particular mix have, let's say, analog 1 and 2 as my inputs, and I'll scroll down to DAW 1 and 2 as my return from the computer, I just press configure, and it makes me a mixer. All right, so now I have analog 1, 2, DAW from the computer, the actual first main mix bus, and the 2 additional buses I've yet to configure. I'm going to go back into the window, which Shift-Command-C is the shortcut, or go back to the mixer pull-down window and go to Configure Mixer. And again, I have to reselect my bus to see what's going on. Now, the hardware input channel name is provided by the Mio console. What you can change is the actual channel name that gets shown in the different elements of the software. So if this analog 1 is, let's say right, and I can go ahead and tab down to channel 2 and call this one left. Now, once I've pressed return and configured the mixer, you'll notice that right and left now propagate to the channel names, and when I go ahead and do things like recording with the record panel, those tracks will be called right and left for the WAV or the AFF files that we use. Okay, back to configure mixer. I got to reselect on the bus every single time. All right, cool things that you can do. When you're actually working by enabling a lot of tracks, you actually can hold on the option key. By holding on option once and then clicking once, it selects all the channels from the top of the list to the bottom. Now that's kind of cool. But wouldn't it be cool if I could actually segregate the list based on the types of channels I want to show? Well, there's a bunch of controls at the bottom here that are kind of cool. The first one, I can actually limit the types of visible channels, either to mono sources, so that kind of kills the end of my list where I have any of the multi-channel sources, or to the reverse, I only show multi-channel sources. Now, within that list, if I want to look at only mono sources, but I only want to look at ADATs, I actually limit the visible channel by searching for them. ADAT for ADAT. and only showing me the ADAT list. If I want to go and create a mixer configuration that only has ADAT, just limit the channels, and then option click in the enable, it grabs them all at once. Very, very cool. Now within the limit visible channel, we have some kind of pop-ups for selected searches that you're going to be using all the time, like analog channels, digital channels. You could type them in, but we put them in there to kind of save you a little bit of time. They show me all the configured channels for this particular piece of hardware, including all my buses. Now, other things we can do here. Let's actually take off this search term off here. I could certainly shift select if I wanted to grab analogs and digitals. Just simply click the first one, shift click the last. As long as those guys are enabled, just go ahead and click in the enable box, and whenever is being selected in that shift clicking, will get enabled that way. Same thing for unenabling those boxes. That's a quick way to do it. Okay. Another thing here is the reset channel names. Okay. The reset channel name goes ahead and resets the names of your mono sources. So in this case, I have analog 1 and analog 2. And if I press that, it's going to go ahead and reset those names back to the default. Now the cool thing about the reset channel names is that it only works on the visible channels. So let's say I go ahead and rename ADAT 1 and 2 to sub 1, sub 2, and I rename, let's see, I'm going to shift tab up to analog 1 and 2 and call them guitar and bass. Now I have these channels. Now I don't want to lose guitar and bass. Those are already good channels. I don't want to rename those. I just want to rename these ADAT channels. So let's go ahead and let's limit the list. Just show the ADAT channels. Okay, and now when I do that, and I reset the channel names, it goes ahead and resets ADAT 1 and 2, which were called sub 1 and sub 2. And now when I remove this listing, my guitar, my bass tracks are unaffected. So that's really kind of cool for if you're doing a lot of sources and you want to just grab the drum subs or whatever. You can just go ahead and list those channels and go ahead and reset the channel names of the visible channels using this limiting function here of grabbing different channel types and just resetting those. Now, a couple other cool things. When you have multiple buses select like a reverb submix and a drum submix, you may want to have those buses as input types in this mix. If I want to have that reverb return back to this particular bus, if you scroll down to the very, very, very bottom, you'll see my additional buses are also listed. I can have those show up in my listing as well. Another nice thing is we stop you from being able to get into a feedback loop. You can't add on the reverb bus, which has nothing selected to it right now. You can't add the reverb bus. It's just the main and the drum submix. There's no way to get like a feedback loop, which is nice. Now, one last little element here. I'm going to go ahead and enable all the channels here. Just option click really quickly. Now there's one last little thing here called only drag selected strips. Now by default it's off. And let's configure that and show you what it does. Because once the mix has been configured, you actually can take a strip here and drag it. Okay? And you can drag it by simply clicking on the channel to make it active and then grabbing the bottom drag strip to move that channel anywhere you want in the mix. Now, if you're on the Configure Mixer window and you actually select to only drag the selected strips, what that means is that if you click anywhere at the top of the fader, anywhere in the inside, any of the gray areas here, it will not select that channel. You can only select the channel by selecting the draggable area here. So one click to select and then click and drag to hold. Again, if it's unselected, you can click anywhere to select the channel. Only select the bottom to drag it. Some folks during the beta cycle just didn't like the fact that you could so simply select and click things and have them highlighted. So if that really bothers you, go ahead and select only drag the selected strip area. And now it doesn't work. So cool things to keep in mind. Use the limit visible types, use the limit visible channels, and remember that you can do this across multiple boxes, so you can only show a certain number of boxes when you want. The last thing we're going to look at here is the ability to move your buses in the bus list. Now, if you have a listing of a lot of buses, I'm going to go ahead and just add a bunch of buses here. All right. When you have this many buses added to your list, when you configure your mixer, and you take a look at any of your actual bus assignments, I have a long list of buses here, and if you're consistently going to the bottom of a list for something, you rather have it at the top, you actually can change the behavior and the alignment. So I want, for example, to have like bus 4, which I'm going to rename stub 2. If you want to have that one appear at the top of the list, simply use the up and down buttons here to bring that particular stub to the top. Now when I go ahead and configure the mixer, and go to any of the bus assignments, stub 2 is down there. So if you're working with a lot of buses, you're doing a live sound, you've got a lot of stubs, post-production, and you want to have those particular bus assignments appear at different orders, just go back to the configure mixer and simply align your channels the way that you want to. And that's the configure mixer window.